Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for, oh, hang on one second. There we go. Thank you for joining us for this Jewish Queeries series today. My name's Jacob Hero Shaw. I'm the Trans Roundtable Coordinator for CLGS, and I am hosting this event for CLGS today, and glad to see you all here. So let me hand this off to our presenters. I'm going to read their bios and introduce them, and then you two can take it away. Rabbi Yoel Kahn, Ph.D., he, him, is the Interim Coordinator of the Jewish Roundtable at CLGS. He was ordained at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in New York and received his Ph.D. from the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. He served as rabbi of Congregation Sha'ar Zahav in San Francisco's GLBT Outreach Synagogue from 1985 to 1996, and recently retired as senior rabbi of Congregation Beth in Berkeley. He has spoken and published wisely about liberal Jewish decision-making, Judaism, sexuality, homosexuality, and the history of Jewish liturgy. His research on the prayer book was published as The Three Blessings, Boundaries, Identity, and Community in Jewish Liturgy from Oxford University Press in 2011. Rabbi Ariel Tovlev, he, they, is a poet, public speaker, and educator who has taught across the United States on gender beyond the binary in Judaism. His original liturgy has been published in Mishkan Ga'ava, Where Pride Dwells. He is currently writing a trans theology. All right. I invite you two to take it away.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you, Jacob. I'm Yoel Kahn. I'm so glad to see friends, old, long-term friends, and some new people here as well today. So thank you for joining us. We're going to be speaking about the history of gay and lesbian, and now more recently queer-focused liturgy. Today, we're really going to go from the old to the new or contemporary, and not spend a lot of time on the stuff in between, because sort of what the in-between is kind of what we are most familiar with, what we're currently using or been around. We want to talk about how we got there to what we have, and also perhaps a little bit to what's cutting edge and going. Since I'm older, I'm going to talk about the historical stuff and invite my younger, chronologically at least, colleague Ariel to speak more about what's contemporary and cutting edge, because he's doing work that I don't know how to do it. I'm very excited about, and I'm excited to hearing from him about the work he's done. Our earliest gay synagogues, which is of course what we called them, they later became lesbian and gay, or gay and lesbian synagogues. Later, some became GLBT synagogues or outreach synagogues or other kinds of things. But notably, they were gay synagogues because gay people were not welcome anyplace else. And so it was creating a space of our own. During the first ones were found, it's a little bit disputed as to whether Los Angeles Beit Chaim Chadashim or New York Congregation Beth Simchat Torah was founded first. They used to both say they were founded in 1973, but I saw recently that one of them, I think BCC now claims 1972, so maybe they're going to claim to be a little bit older. They were the first two. Sha'ar Zahav in San Francisco was founded in 1976, I want to say. Is that right, Rose? Or seven? Seven. Eli says, thank you. I knew it was close enough. If I move GCC up a year, they can move them up a year too, perhaps. And at its peak, which I would say was probably the early 90s, there were, I think, more than 20 member groups of the World Congress of Gay and Lesbian organizations. The earliest influences on what shaped the prayer and religious culture of our congregations was actually in Los Angeles, was MCC, the Christian denomination. And so it's not a coincidence that MCC helped found BCC. It was actually Troy Perry who had Jews who were coming to MCC in LA who encouraged them to found BCC. Originally, it was actually called the Metropolitan Community Synagogue or Congregation. And then they kept the initials and switched it to Beit Hayim Chadashim, the House of Renewed or a New Life. From its beginning, BCC in Los Angeles was affiliated with the Reform movement. So its two influences really that shaped it at the very beginning were very much Reform movement and the MCC experience of some of its founders. The Reform movement continued to influence some of the other early congregations. Sha'ar, Zahav in San Francisco, affiliated quite early on with the Reform movement, as did the congregation in Philadelphia. On the other hand, the Atlanta synagogue affiliated from the very early days with the Reconstructionist movement. And so how the liturgy and values and texts and prayer books of these movements in turn were brought into a sort of a foundational text for our congregations. On the other hand, CBST in New York, more than just about anybody else, had what I call the yeshiva bucher or yeshiva kid kind of influence upon it. Those of you who know about Sha'ar Zahav know that Daniel Chesler, for example, sort of grew up in that Orthodox yeshiva world. And in Beit Simchat Torah, New York was even more so. When I went to CBST in New York, what was notable was that on Purim, especially Purim when you can pass as something you are not, but also Purim was a Jewish holiday in which you could travel opposed to Shabbat. When you didn't, the number of Black-coded Orthodox or ultra-Orthodox who would show up at CBST on Purim, but adjacency, there were many more of them around. And so CBST from its beginning was much more to the, we'll say, traditionalist side in its decisions and practices than were most of the other congregations. One of the other places that ways that influenced our liturgy, there was a time when many Jewish kids had been going to Jewish summer camp, and summer camp sensibility about how to pray and how to lead synagogues and tunes and melodies were being brought back from Camp Ramah, from URJ, Camp Swigs and other places. On the other side, on the other hand, outside of these Jewish influences was feminism, radical fairies, other kinds of queer, critical, alternative sensibilities that were sometimes brought in and became an important focus on what our congregations were doing. And finally, the last thing is that with very rare exceptions, Los Angeles being really the first in Sha'ar Zahav somewhat soon thereafter, most of these congregations did not have rabbis. Or they did have rabbis, they were heavily influenced by being lay-led and volunteer commitment, something that has still continued, for example, as far as Sha'ar Zahav's very nature. So the culture of each of our congregations was quite different. So I'm not sure I'm going to be necessarily accurate about the entirety of our movement, and the examples of the texts I'm going to bring today are primarily, in fact, exclusively from the early printed Sidurim of Sha'ar Zahav in San Francisco and from CBST in New York. I want to speak about those earliest Sidurim. The earliest prayer books, and I remember this actually from being at Sha'ar Zahav in the 1970s, were Xeroxes of traditional prayer books with whiteout. And in particular, egalitarian language was important from the very beginning. And so there would be a Xerox with the names of God. I apologize for any people who are more traditionally inclined than I on this call, but the names of God were actually whited out and something else was written in its place. The other thing was that people felt very, very free around copyright. Copyright and copyright protection was not a big concern. And so people would cut and paste and rematch freely, and we'll see that in some of the texts, in particular from the CBST in New York text, and how they brought a queer sensibility or a gay sensibility into historically received texts, particularly in English text. And the other thing I want to say is I'm going to be focusing myself in this talk primarily about text, but text is not the only place to be looking when we talk about our history. The context And the way the service was conducted was also a very important message. For example, at Sha'ar Zahav, one of the earliest rules was that everyone began and ended the service by singing a song and by singing Hineini at the beginning of the service and Oseh Shalom at the end of the service and putting their arms around each other. And Daniel Chester used to speak about this, and we saw all these people came in and they were so afraid to be in the room of all these whatever, and I'm going to get homo cooties or whatever else, that we wanted to emphasize the importance of connection and actually touching each other was an important key message of how the liturgy was done. That's not just textual, but the way was conducted as well. So those are my introductory comments, and then I'm going to jump right now into some text. So let's go there, over to here, please, and hit share. And here we go. All right. I just noticing admire my rainbow PowerPoint capacities. And now let's see if we can get on to the next one. So this is a text from Sha'ar Zahav's 1983 protocol that was used earlier. We would begin the service with singing Hineini, how good it is to gather in a rainbow of affections and sexual preferences and the house of a God who loves each of us as we are created, who is without limit and forever. How sweet it is to gather women and men together in the house of a God who transcends human limits and categories. Here we see in this opening text a framing of the core message that our congregations bring as a theological statement, which is God loves you, loves each of us as we are created, loves without limit and fear, and God who transcends human limits and categories. We're going to see this theme come up again and again. Oops, one too far. Then this is now these are printed in the Protocol 1983. I'm pretty sure they also came out earlier, well before, and actually. Well, they were there in 85, so no means the first time they came out. In any case, here's an example of a text that is adopted from a Martin Buber text, and I've not restored, I've not tried to change and update them to the kind of language that we would use. Overwhelmingly in the place where we would now mostly use queer or similar or all-inclusive language. A lot of the language in these older texts is very emphatically, explicitly just says gay one way or another. But notice, I thank you for my life and my soul and my body, my name, my sexual and my affectional nature, for my way of thinking and talking. Help me realize. Now, from the part about help me realize that second sentence, it's almost a word-for-word paraphrase of Buber. But the first sentence adds the queer framing for it, my sexual and affectional nature, and which we therefore take this historical Jewish idea of being created, B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God, into then being applied specifically to our own queer or gay identity. And so it's part of the second part. If the first slide was entitled God Loves You, the second one, as you can see here, is called Being Gay is Okay. Another important theme was the experience of being closeted. One of the things that struck me when I came to Sha'ar Zahav in 1985, which was already some years after its founding, 9 years, but that people used their last names. At BCC in Los Angeles, almost no one used last names, nor did they in New York. It reminded me of a 12-step community where everyone was just, name plus initial. So this is from an adaptation from a text that was probably circulating, I think it was by Rabbi Jack Reamer. We've left the office, the store, the plant, and the university, and we've eagerly prepared ourselves to greet the Shabbat to begin our moment of rest. You could imagine that kind of responsive reading that was common in this period, but then note the next sentence. We've come here Shabbat for rest, not only from what breadwinning, but also from some of us, from the effort of appearing straight in a straight world, the rest from the effort of pretending to be what we are not. So this was in Beth Simchat Torah in New York, where I have to say that even more than San Francisco, the proportion of its members who came were indeed deeply closeted. And this explicit saying out loud of here we are and what we are doing here in this gay, safe space was an incredibly important affirmation. They do it again here in another text, which, as opposed to the previous one was a Shabbat text, is originally a Yom Kippur text. It was from a book of readings for Yom Kippur about speaking truth and whatever. And so notice the inserted lines, and I thought I was going to read those. As gays, we often feel forced to pretend that to be that which we are not, to present ourselves in ways which are not truthful, and sometimes without lies. And so then inserts this in the middle of the text about truth telling on Yom Kippur. This actually got moved and included in CBST on the Friday night as part of Kabbalat Shabbat. About being out in front of God. If you can't be out in the world, you can be out with God. And it turns into a redemptive prayer as well. At the end, may our worship help us practice truth in speech and in thought before you, but to ourselves and for one another. Fine, generic, high holiday sentiment. And may we finally complete our liberation so that we no longer feel the need to practice evasions and deceits, and which the homecoming or religious teshuvah is moved into a political and communal context in which liberation means, right, where our hiding is not because we are speaking half truth, we are twisting facts or silence, but because it is a consequence of our oppression. So it moves this sort of movement from reading the text as a personal confession to also being a critical social analysis going on as well. And here again, moving outward again, we take a historical text, or not a historical text, but a communal national text, which is the English translation of the prayer for the Jewish people. Bless the household of Israel wherever they dwell. Be with us here where we worship you in freedom and liberation. Very American. Probably supposed to be liberty rather than liberation, the original, I imagine. As we cherish the freedom that is ours, so do we pray that those of our brothers who live in oppression find release and liberty speedily in our own day. I have to assume that this was written in the 70s in its original context and was a reference to the campaigns to free Russian Jewry, which was a big focus of Jewish communal life during this period. But then notice at the front end, what CBST's editors did, bless all gay people with liberation, men and women, young and old, those fully open. May we all be granted your blessings of freedom, liberation, and equality. So here again, the Jewish story gets seen now as being parallel to the queer story, or we insert our queer story as being parallel to the Jewish story, and they are here merged together. And so the community is now not just the Jewish community, but also all gay people, wherever they are. And the sense of solidarity that we find so often in the Jewish communal texts about our responsibility one for another is here then mapped onto our sense of concern for queer people as well. And the last in this series, I think, is something from CBST. This was written, I have 99% confidence by a CSD member, but he liked to remain anonymous in his liturgical work. So I won't say who it is, although we're 90% sure of who it is. I'll just read it because I think it is still rings true for us. Sister I never held near, comrade I never embraced, your memories almost lost. The one we don't talk about, the loving one who never married, the one for whom no Kaddish is said, your loneliness calls out to me. I know of your struggles, we are not strangers. If my path is easier, I will not forget who walked it first. We call you to mind, but did you not think of us, your children, lovers across the years, those who would follow and would think of you and bless your memory and call you to mind? David and Jonathan, we will not forget you. With Ruth and Naomi, we will not forget you. In the name of God, you are our sisters and our brothers, and we ask that you be remembered for peace. It's a beautiful text. It's a Yom Kippur Yizkor reading is where this came in. A couple things I'd like to just draw your attention to in this text. One is that it's both male and female, reaches out to both men and women, sister, comrade. David, Jonathan, Ruth, and Naomi, sisters and brothers, are mentioned here. The sense of loss, the one Nom Kaddish is said, this image of a loneliness, of pain that's there, but also the sense of heritage, right? Your children, lovers across the years. We have both the children and the lovers past, all right? And then we also invoke historical Jewish texts bring us back biblically, claiming David and Jonathan and Ruth and Naomi, both of whom midrashically, by the way, in historical texts as well as our own texts are often seen as our queer foreparents or ancestors. Here they are invoked as well. So here it is. We, like we sometimes do with feminism, we imagine the past or project an imagined past and bring it into our present. A little more complicated is want to look at two different versions of the Aleinu, one from CSD and one from New York from CBST. In the Hebrew text, how does the Hebrew text go? Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol tikku d'lo yoser b'rishit shelo asanu k'goyei ha'aratzot, who did not make us like goyei ha'aratzot, like all the other nations of the earth. It's clearly about the Jewish collective. But in this translation, we change the goyim, goyei ha'aretz becomes people, which is not necessarily referred to the peoples, but individual people. So moving from a collective or group narrative becomes an individual who has made each one different and has given us each a special destiny. Right? Special destiny, that's not bad for a translation of the original. Who has led our souls to worship the one God of all creation, very traditional text, and has formed our hearts to love in our own unique way. And I'd like to say, hint, get it? It's for the God who created us, who transcends human power and human judgments. We saw this, as you may recall, in our Hineini reading at the very beginning of the service. Here it is, comes back again. And here is again a spin on the historical text. Okay, nekaveh. And so I hope all people abandon their empty worship. That's a fair translation of the original Hebrew, but the worship of human bigotry and cease the blasphemy of calling on your name to justify oppression and hatred. One of the distinguishing characteristics of this early Sha'ar Zahav liturgy is the not necessarily explicit, but not all that subtle either, tones that it often takes. So as we like to say in Hebrew sometimes, hamevin yavin, those who understand will understand. It's pretty obvious what this is referring to, and I have to say it's still true. It's still a valid text, but it's not say anything. The word gay is, or queer, or lesbian, or homosexual is not anywhere in this text, you know, right? You have to sort of like get it or understand it or see it. Contrast that, please, with our next text, which is from Congregation Beth Simchat Torah, whose first paragraph is exactly the traditional text. Again, this is, I was referring to CBST, and its leaders and founders came from a more traditional place and didn't hesitate to quote the traditional liturgy exactly as it had been handed down. But then they notice, then they add a new paragraph. As gay and lesbian Jews, we sometimes are forced to hide the qualities that distinguish us from others, our love for each other, our heritage of creativity spanning millennia, our unique attributes with which we in God's image were created. It's a little bit about queer essentialism here. If you ask me, I just note our heritage of creativity. Is this like, I don't know, the arts and the dancers and the whatnot? That just cries out to me a little bit. But this cannot affect our inner resolve to honor and fulfill our special purpose, to live out to the wonderful, unknowable design in which each of us has a part to play. And so we bow in reverence, and it goes on with the traditional text. So here's a place basically where we took the historical text and just pulled it apart a little bit and stuck something else in the middle to add our new content. I think this is one of the most important prayers in our collective canon. It's the CSD Omele Rachamim. I call it Omele Rachamim. I didn't have a name or title when it was first published, but it clearly is a spin on El Omele Rachamim, the traditional mourner's prayer. And it used to be recited, and still is, before the Kaddish at every service. We're going to look at some of the different variations of what have happened to it. Oh God, remember today our gay sisters and brothers who were martyred in years past, those murdered by fanatics, those who perished in the Holocaust, and those struck down in our own city in our own time. Remember also those who took their own lives, driven to despair by a world that hated them because of their love. And in mercy, remember those who live lives of loneliness, repressing their true nature and refraining from sharing their love with one another. O God, accept the holy sacrifice of these martyrs and call an end to the hate and oppression that we have known for so long. There's an oral history that says that the line about struck down in our own city in our own time was added after Harvey Milk in 1977, 78. I don't know that that is true or not. That's the I don't have a text. I don't have an earlier text of it without it always being included. The last line was changed at some point quite early on, though. Instead of accept the holy sacrifice of these martyrs, and accept the sacrifice makes it sound as if they were an offering. It is parallel to some of the original, more historical texts around it. But apparently it offended people, would bother people a little bit, and so it was changed to remember the sacrifice of these martyrs from accept, and help us bring an end to hate and oppression of every kind. Notice the theological move as well, from a more distant calling on God to end hate and oppression. It's the partnership language so prominent in the Reform movement. Help us bring an end to hate and oppression of every kind. But over time, as our sense of who were our gay sisters and brothers evolved, the text evolved as well. And this is the version that came out in Sidur Zahav 2009. And Andrew, you just tell me if this is the current text that's still used, or been modified. Has the text been modified since Sidur Zahav came out, or is it the correct current text? I just want to double check.
That, I think you're right, is the correct text that we use now. Yeah.
Good. Andrew, as long as you're unmuted, can I ask you to read it for us?
Sure. Oh God, remember today those members of our family who were martyred in years past because of their sexual or gender identity, those murdered by fanatics in the Middle Ages, those who perished in the Holocaust, and those struck down in our own city, in our own time. That might be plural, though, in our own city, so I'll have to go check. Remember also those who took their own lives, driven to despair by a world that hated them. And in mercy, remember those who lived lives of loneliness, repressing their true nature and refraining from sharing their love with one another. Oh God, watch over the souls of these beloved ones, lesbian,
Yeah.
bisexual, transgender, and help us bring an end to hate and oppression of every kind.
Thank you. I apologize for the typos, the typo there. So here is an effort to, again, reflecting our more wider sensibility of who we are trying to be inclusive. So, and replaced brothers and sisters in favor of those members of our family. And again, so on the one hand, we get rid of the individual nouns in favor of a wider sense of familiar ownership. the older text had driven just by, well, they hated them because of their love for one another, and it takes that off because they just hated them for being who they are, including all people, regardless of their relationships. And then it really names who is there. I have to say for myself, I just remember the first time I heard this and its power on me, and it still has that same power for me today. I want to look at one more text before I turn it over to Ariel. I'll type the last one. Yeah. Oh, okay. During the early mid 80s, it's the saying of Misha Berach at every service, Friday night services, started to be done in Reform synagogues, and Sha'ar Zahav was one of the pioneers. We added this Misha Berach prayer to the Friday evening service in the late 80s. But the traditional text, as some of you know, is we ask God to send a complete healing, a healing of body and a healing of spirit. And with people dying every single week all around us, it didn't seem entirely appropriate or authentic or honest to say, send a complete healing, because it just wasn't happening. It just was not possible. And so instead, you'll see we changed the last line. May the one who blessed our ancestors, Sarah and Abraham, Rebecca and Isaac, Leah, Rachel, and Jacob, bless, and then naming out loud, all who are touched by AIDS and related illnesses, grant insight to those who bring healing, courage and faith to those who are sick, love and strength to us and all who love them. God, let your spirit rest on all who are ill and comfort them. May they and we soon know a time of complete healing, a healing of the body and a healing of the spirit. And let us say amen. So I just draw attention to the affirmative action that we always sort of put the matriarchs before the patriarchs in the first line. Initially, this was 8, and then the last line was rather moved from may we send them a complete healing to may we soon know a time, and which it moved away from individual healing right now to more collective yearning for healing. AIDS and related illnesses was the original language, and then it felt like other people were dealing with other kinds of life-threatening illnesses, and so relatively early on, the language was changed to AIDS and all life-threatening illness, and then specifically as women in the congregation were speaking about breast cancer, it seems to me, it's words cancer and all AIDS, cancer, and all life-threatening illness was the text was changed as well at some point after as well. I would just point out that since my own use of this text more recently, have added healing of the body, healing of spirit, healing of mind, but to also try and be more inclusive of that's not in these texts. The next generation was the more formal printing of what had been relatively in-house produced. So Sidur Sha'ar Zahav came out in 2009 and has been widely disseminated, and Sidur B'Kol Levavcha came out from CBSC in New York in 2007. And just as these were the pioneering congregations in organizing original liturgy, as far as I know, they're the only GLBT outreach congregations that have published their own prayer books. So that's sort of a look at sort of the older, more original first generation stuff. And now I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Rabbi Ariel Tovlev, to talk us about more contemporary liturgy. Ariel?
Thank you so much. That was fascinating. I learned so much, and I'm happy to take us into the next generation. So I will also pull up some text. Please bear with me while I share my screen. Okay. So as we move to the 2000s and beyond, a big focus becomes trans liturgy and trans ritual, understanding that that was really left out of a lot of the earlier editions and was sort of the gap that needed to be filled. And so this was written by Rabbi Elliot Kukla, who was the first ordained trans rabbi out of Hebrew Union College, the Reformed Seminary. And this was originally published on his on a website that he and some other trans Jews created together called Trans Torah. And it's still there today. You can look it up. I think it's transtorah.org, and you will find it there. So this is Blessings for Any Moment While Transitioning. And it was originally intended as a mikvah ritual. So those of you who are more familiar with mikvah might notice that it has a 3-blessing formula that ends with the Shehechianu, and that is for the 3 immersions in the mikvah. So we have Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Hama'avira et Ha'ovrim. Blessed are you, Eternal One, our God, ruler of time and space, the transforming one to those who transition, transform, and or cross over. So we'll be talking a little bit about gender and gender language in Hebrew more towards the end of my talk, but just to point it out right now, here we have the traditional masculine language at the beginning, the Baruch Atah Adonai, but then we also have Hama'avira instead of Hama'avir. And so we see some blending of masculine and feminine. And this was really the way that a lot of the early trans liturgy dealt with gender in a way to become more gender expansive, was to mix the masculine and feminine language. We'll see it again in this next blessing, Baruch At Adonai, Eloheinu Ruach HaOlam, She'asani B'Tzalmo V'Chirtzona. So there too we have the mix of gender. Blessed are you, Eternal One, our God, ruler of time and space, who has made me in his image and according to her will. This one is a direct combination of the traditional blessings that are said upon waking. Made me in his image is traditionally said for men, and according to her will is a more progressive version of the traditional blessing that women say. And the last one is the Shehechianu, as I said, generally done in a mikvah setting. And so this really will allow the person who is experiencing this moment of transition to have a mikvah ritual and to be able to use mikvah as a moment to mark the transition, which can be really powerful for people, especially because gender transition can end up being sort of a nebulous time frame. At what point do we consider something ongoing to be finalized? Well, that's really hard to say if it's an ongoing process. And so this ends up allowing people to have a moment in time to say, before this, I was one thing, after this, I'm another, and to really accept that, that transition in a more concrete, finalized way. So this next prayer was written by Rabbi Reuben Zellman, and this was originally published in the newer CBST prayer book. I actually have my copy up here. This screen grab that I took, it was republished in Mishkan Ga'ava. This is a collection of LGBTQ liturgy writings and rituals from a Jewish perspective. And so it was republished in Mishkan Ga'ava, but originally was published in Sidor B'chol Levabecha. And so it's called Twilight People, a prayer for trans Jews. As the sun sinks and the colors of the day turn, we
Ariel, do you want to advance your slide?
Sorry?
Do you want to advance your slide?
Do you not see it?
No, we're still on the moment. We're still on the transitioning one.
Oh, okay, hang on. Sorry about that. It moved for me.
Yeah, and we're not seeing the slideshow. We're seeing your master, uh, you want, I think perhaps you want to share a different screen. Look, if you want to look at, take a moment and check.
Oh, that's really strange. It says it's showing the right one for me. Let me stop share and try again. Is that one better?
We're seeing Twilight people, but we're still seeing your master screen.
Yes, but then if I go slideshow, does that work? It doesn't.
That's why we'll be happy with this.
Ah, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
This one bigger. Here, maybe I'll do a portion of the screen share one more time. Let me try. Okay. Sorry about that.
We're good.
Okay, I tried. um, all right. Okay. As the sun sinks and the colors of the day turn, we offer a blessing for the twilight. For twilight is neither day nor night, but in between. All of us are twilight people. We can never be fully labeled or defined. All of us have many identities and loves, many genders and none. All of us are in between roles and at the intersection of histories. All of us are crisscrossed paths of memory and destination, streaks of light swirled together. We are neither day nor night. We are both, neither, and all. May the sacred in-between of this evening suspend our certainties, soften our judgments, and widen our vision. May this in-between light illuminate our way to the God who transcends all categories and definitions. May the in-between people who have come to pray be lifted into this twilight. We cannot always be defined. We can always say a blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hayotzer et hadimdumim. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, who brings on the twilight. So as you can see from this blessing, it does address trans Jews specifically, but it's also written in a very universalist way. We are all of us, etc. And so it's really meant to be expansive so that everyone can feel comfortable saying this and feel like it fits them in some way, but trans Jews can feel that especially in a unique highlighted way. But these are sort of the early beginnings of trans liturgy. And as we go further, we move away from that universalism to understand that not everyone needs to say the blessing, not everyone needs to feel like it applies to them. We can have things unique to trans Jews and have that be okay. This is a blessing like that. That's not for everyone, only for trans Jews. Someone else can say it, but they might feel a little uncomfortable as it doesn't apply to them. This is a blessing that I wrote, really wanting to give another option rather than in the morning when you wake up, rather than having a blessing for men or a blessing for women, or simply just combining the two. I wanted something that affirms uniquely the trans experience and trans identity. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, who has molded my soul from contradictions. From apparent opposites you have created me, and from within dichotomies I can see the plurality of your creation. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu boret ha'olam, she'asani trans. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, creator of the world, who has made me trans. So this is an affirmational blessing meant to be said at any time, but is also especially useful for a Trans Day of Visibility or something of that sort, which is more celebratory. But as Yoel said earlier, we also need those blessings that are for times that are less celebratory. And here we have two different blessings that were both written for Transgender Day of Remembrance, which occurs in November and is to remember all of the trans people whose lives were lost. It started out to remember people who died by murder, but has been included those who died by suicide, and also understanding that a lot of trans people are without health care, without homes, without reliable jobs or employment opportunities. And so expanding it to include those who have lost their lives in really a variety of ways that reflect structural disadvantages that trans people face. I think for the sake of time, because I really want to get to the Hebrew aspect, I'm not going to read these two, but they are both featured in Mishkan Gava. I very much highly recommend this book. The first one was written by Rabbi Reuben Zellman, and I wrote the second one. And it might be interesting to compare the two to see what the language was like around 2009 when Reuben wrote his versus around 2019 when I wrote mine. But to get into the Hebrew, I'm a grammar nerd, and this is really a joy of mine. And so I am delighted to bring you along this journey with me. And I think we should have some time for questions. So if I go a little fast, don't worry, you can ask clarifying questions when I'm done. So there are two main ways to address Hebrew in prayers, as Hebrew is a very gendered language, and specifically a very binary gendered language. So the first option that we saw was degendered Hebrew. And we'll cover that a little bit and what that means and what that looks like. And then we'll go into gender expansive Hebrew and how that's different. So this was really popularized and maybe even originated, I'll say, by Marcia Falk. So with degendered Hebrew, we're taking the gender out of the Hebrew. We want to have Hebrew where when we look at it, there really isn't a gender present in it. And the easiest way to do this is to move the verbs into a we pronoun. So in Hebrew, you really get in trouble with the you pronouns. You is gendered in Hebrew, unlike in English, where we can say you and that is gender neutral. In Hebrew, it is gendered. And so to avoid this, we move to the we language. So Nivarech et ein hachayim hamotzia lechem min haaretz. Let us bless the source of life that brings forth bread from the earth. And so the positives of the degendering of Hebrew, first of all, we have a degendering of us, the ones who bless, and we also have a degendering of God. We are making ourselves the ones who have the active verbs, and then we also, for God, we use the source of life, and then we're able to gender it based on the grammatical genders of those words. So it becomes a, the gender question becomes about what the word's gender is rather than what God's gender is. So we see we're able to now not assume gender about those of us who are doing the praying and not have any gender on God as well. Another way that this is used is to do the infinitive. So we're not conjugating verbs at all. We're just avoiding the conjugation, and then that way we're able to avoid the gender as well. And so maybe this is something that might be familiar to some of you. In an aliyah, we normally say ya'amod or ta'amod. Please stand before we say the person's name to come forward for an aliyah for Torah. And ya'amod for men, ta'amod for women. To avoid this, we can move to the infinitive na la'amod. And so we're going to sort of a gerund form and avoiding the gender completely. And then instead of ben or bat, we can use mi beit, which means from the house of. And so this was officially adopted by the conservative movement just a couple of years ago. So this is their official non-binary recommendation of how to call someone to Torah who doesn't identify as male or female. And so it works. Nala mode, you don't have gender. There's nothing offensive about that. But if we're avoiding gender, then it's kind of just removing what is offensive rather than having anything that might be specifically affirming or validating for someone. So while this is an option and some people do prefer it, it's good to have other options as well. This is a way, non-binary Hebrew project is a way to have gender within the Hebrew, but have it be a non-binary gender. So it's sort of a third gender option. And this is a way to have gender explicitly be a part of the Hebrew so that we're not avoiding the issue, but really tackling it in a new way. So we saw some pronouns earlier. Ata is you in the masculine. At is you in the feminine. And here we have ate is you in non-binary Hebrew. And likewise, atem is you plural for masculine. Aten is you plural for feminine. And so we combine those, atemen, and that becomes second person plural. Rather than who, which is he, or he, which is she. It's always funny saying that and getting confused with all of the pronouns. He is the third person singular non-binary pronoun. And then rather than hem or hen, we see hemen for third person plural. I only included the pronouns here because they have a whole grammatical system, but it does apply to nouns and verbs as well. If you are interested in learning more about non-binary Hebrew, you can go to nonbinaryhebrew.com and see how it works grammatically. But for some examples of non-binary Hebrew, this is from a Sidur called Sidur Masorti. I also have it here. It's a really cool Masorti Sephardic style Sidur, and they call it egalitarian. And so it's not only inclusive of gender when it comes to women, but also inclusive of gender when it comes to non-binary folks. And so you can see here from modeh, moda, modet, ani. So I give thanks. And they have the three options available. So rather than like Marcia Falk would write, nodeh, ani, we give thanks, and which is not gendered, but this really gives an option to have it be I give thanks. Modeh, moda, modet, ani. And then to show how this would work with an aliyah, here we have some verbs in the non-binary Hebrew. So rather than ya'amod or ta'amod, it would be ya'amdeh. And then rather bar or bat, it would be bet. So Ya'amdeh, name, Bet, family. And another example is, here's one of the morning blessings from Shacharit. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani bet chorin. When traditionally it would be bar or bat, or ben or bat chorin. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, who has made me a free person. And so far, we have covered how non-binary people might be able to alter or change blessings so that they can feel affirmed praying with their identity validated and not misgendering themselves in their prayers. But more recently, we have taken it a step further. We've said we've rethought what it means to be human. We've rethought how we might refer to ourselves. And so understanding that we are made in the image of God, if we rethink ourselves, we also need to rethink God. So how can we change God language to express a multi-gendered view of God as well, so that we are not just referring to God in the masculine, or as some people might refer to God in masculine and feminine, to add another option too, and maybe have 3 ways that we pray to God or conceptualize God. So here is an example of Hamotzi written in non-binary Hebrew, where God is the one with a non-binary language. Baruch atah Adonai Elohimotenu malket ha'olam hamotzia lechem min ha'aretz. Blessed are you, Adonai our God, ruler of the universe, who has brought forth bread from the earth. And so this is all to say that really we are in a new frontier of queer and trans liturgy. We are not only reconceptualizing ourselves, but reconceptualizing God. We're creating new ritual, and we're thinking deeply about our theology, about who we are and how do we put what we believe in our actual prayers and in our actual ritual experiences. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ariel. That was great. I learned so much. And I just seeing the people who are here, I know that people, there's a great deal of liturgical and Jewish experience amongst our participants. I just want to open it up to questions, comments, observations from people who are here. You're welcome to either raise your hand virtually through the comments below, or just raise your hand otherwise. I'll just throw out one correction. Oh, there we go. I thought, well, good. We'll wait for that. Also, Eli, I see you there. I'm going to call you in one moment, but I just want to mention one thing, that a correction that somebody made for us. Thank you. That Gabe Raphael made, and the text about the Amalei Rachamim for our martyrs. It used to be in the first version of it was in our own city, in our own time. And then appropriately, when it was published in the Siddur, it was moved to the plural, in our own cities, in our own time. There. Good. All right, I'm going to turn it over to you, Eli, please.
Well, thank you both, rabbis. This was so wonderful. I started going to CBST in 1974, about 1 million years ago. And I could not have imagined that there would be the world we're living in now. And so I'm curious, in the department that I like to think of rabbis as prophetic, can you imagine where the questions about non-binary and trans and all of this might evolve? So what will, like, people 20 years from now be looking at, exploring and recrafting?
Ariel?
Sure. I love thinking about this, of where we will be in the future. And I think something that I'm noticing is with the kids these days, growing up in a world where they can be more expressive about who they are and what their identities are, it's becoming increasingly a non-issue if they're queer or gender expansive. And they're no longer really attaching themselves to labels or feeling that it's necessary to have these identity terms. And so I'm imagining, not only will we see that with regard to sexuality, but we will also see that with regard to gender. And more parents are also deciding to raise their children either without gender norms or even without gender assignments. There's gender creative parenting is a new trend. And so there's this question of if trans means to identify with a gender other than the one that you were assigned, is it possible to be transgender if you were not assigned a gender? If you chose your gender yourself and had no identity other than what you chose, regardless of biology, could you be transgender or cisgender? Is that even a possibility? Or are you something else entirely? And so I think we will start seeing that becoming something that the new generation will want to reflect in their prayers of, trans and transgender and cisgender is a thing of the past when we had this idea that, biology was reflective of gender. And now that we've moved past that, how will the next generation find something new to focus on and find a new sort of language to express, the otherness that they maybe grew up with instead of having to come out as.
So we're moving to perhaps, Aurel, you're suggesting to pangender language, perhaps. I don't know if that's the right word.
I'm not even sure. I think we'll have to wait 20 years and ask the kids.
Very good, very good. I wanted to ask you, Eli, if you have some memories of what it was like at CBST and when you first arrived. I got there in 1981, but you were yet a generation before me there.
Well, I remember to this day very vividly. It was June. It was hot. They were meeting in a church. I had seen a poster up on a lamppost. In walking out in the street, it's like I couldn't even imagine gay synagogue, but that's what it said. And it was very amazing when I showed up because it was hot. I was in a t-shirt and jeans thinking I can do anything I want here. Almost every single other person in the room was in a jacket and a tie and trousers and had short hair, all the men and all the women, or at least that's how I verbalized it then, the men and the women. Or when I was then like, oh my God, all the fags and all the dykes are totally butch and I'm not. So it was quite amazing. And I remember it to this day. So thanks for your question. Oh, and of course, I fell in love with the one convert there.
Yes. I will say that I actually was was one of the people Daniel Chester was trying to reach because I definitely first came to Sha'ar Zahav in 1976 when I was a college student at UC Berkeley. And I definitely was sitting at the back of the room, and the idea of touching anybody else in the room was very difficult for me to imagine. Sort of standing putting arms around it was a very big deal. I'm going to assume, Rose, this is still the minhag congregation. I'm only on Zoom lately. I don't know. Rose, you're unmuted. I was asking the question whether. Go ahead, now you're on.
My mic, no.
No mic.
My mic doesn't work.
All right.
Rose, we can hear you.
You can?
Yes.
Oh, fabulous. Okay, repeat the question, please.
My question was, is the beginning and ending with Oseh Shalom and Hineini still continuing into the reason and the practice the same?
Absolutely. It's part of our minhag on Zoom. It's part of our minhag in person. And right, even on Zoom, we link arms across the squares. So
Thank you.
there are many things that started in your time or even before that still continue with some tweaks.
Got it. Other questions or comments before we wrap this up? I want to thank my colleague Ariel Tovlev, who has actually done all three of these programs with me here. This wraps up our series of Jewish Roundtable for this year, but please stay on the list and stay connected to the CLGS for upcoming programs. And this also wraps up my tenure as the interim coordinator of the Roundtable. It's been my pleasure to do this for the last several programs, and I look forward to being part of future programs. Jacob, can I turn it over to you?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank both of you for presenting. This was really wonderful, and thank you for being here. And thank you for so much for filling in with the roundtable. So let's give them a round of applause.
Thank you. I also want to observe that this evening is at the beginning of the holiday of Shavuot, the anniversary of the receipt of the Torah. And one of the great teachings is that when Torah was spoken, that each person heard it in the way that could reach them. And so I hope that we will continue to have an evolving Jewish community in which the words of tradition and the words of Torah are both spoken to and heard in the ways that each person can hear as they're able. Thank you all so much for joining us, and wish everyone the best. Chag Sameach. Bye-bye.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Chag Sameach.
Sameach.